She had spent 47 minutes in the stationery aisle of a paper goods shop on North Wells Street before she found the right envelope. Not the cream ones that came in packs of 20, not the ivory, the small robin's egg blue one, the color of early sky before the rest of the day had arrived, with a flap that sealed with a small gold clasp. She'd bought two, one to ruin practicing the fold, and by the time she reached the counter, the sonogram was tucked inside the better one, and she had the strangest feeling that this was the happiest she'd ever been at a pharmacy register in her entire life. She was going to tell Paxton Sinclair tonight. She'd rehearsed the sentence 3 times on the L train uptown, not a speech, just, "Paxton, there's something I need to show you." Then she'd hand him the envelope. Then she'd let his face do the rest. She was 9 weeks along, and she'd known for 11 days, which was 11 days of carrying something enormous and completely alone, walking through her clinic and taking blood pressures and reassuring mothers about ear infections and acting entirely like herself, while underneath all of it, this thing was happening that was enormous and hers and frightening, and somewhere under the fright, undeniably wanted. She wanted to tell him, that was the thing. She actually wanted to. That was how she knew it was real. She'd been with Paxton for 8 months, not publicly or not exactly. He was private in the way that men with particular last names and particular amounts of money learn to be private early, and she'd understood that. The Sinclair name carried weight in Chicago, the way old buildings carry load-bearing walls, structural, invisible from the outside, impossible to remove without consequence. She'd accepted that her name would not be in the same sentence as his in any room that had more than 3 people in it. She told herself it was reasonable. She told herself it was temporary. What she hadn't told herself, because she hadn't needed to, was that the parts of him no one else saw were the parts she'd fallen in love with. He made coffee at 6 in the morning by standing in the kitchen in his socks reading a paperback with a cracked spine, and he always made 2 cups without asking. He had opinions about hospital architecture, specific, slightly heated opinions about the design failure of emergency waiting rooms, that he would elaborate on at length if she asked, and sometimes when she didn't. He kept a running list in a notes app of things he'd eaten and liked, which he'd started as a joke and never deleted, and which currently had 411 entries going back 6 years. She had found this list entirely by accident and not told him she'd seen it, because knowing about the list, unobserved, felt like being given a small window into the person he actually was underneath everything else. She loved him. She had not said it yet. She was working up to it. Tonight was going to be the beginning of that, the blue envelope, its own kind of first sentence. Paxton had texted her that afternoon. "Partners dinner at Carver House tonight. Private room. Come by at 8:30. We'll leave together after." She arrived at 8:15, a little early, because she was nervous, and nervous made her early. The hostess smiled and said Mr. Sinclair's party was in the back room and she could go right through, and Elodie went right through, past the main dining room, past the bar, down the narrow corridor that ran behind the kitchen, and that was when she took the wrong door. She would not fully understand how she'd gotten turned around. The corridor branched. She'd gone left when she should have gone right, and the door she pushed open led to a short service hallway that ran flush against the back wall of the private room, and the wall between them was not solid. There was a vent or a gap in the paneling or something she couldn't name, and through it she could hear everything. Glasses being refilled, a man she didn't know saying something about a pitch deck, laughter. Then a voice she recognized, Paxton's business partner, Alden. She'd met him twice, saying, "Speaking of distractions, is the nurse situation still going on?" A pause. She stopped walking. Elodie, Paxton's voice, warm, a little amused, the particular tone he used when he was performing ease in front of the people he performed for. "That's she's not a situation. A beat. She's just someone I've been spending time with. It's not serious." She seemed like she had ideas about that. "She's a good person. Another beat. She'll be fine." Elodie stood in the service hallway with the blue envelope against her chest and did not move. She'll be fine. She thought about the 2 cups of coffee, about the list with 411 entries, about the way he'd said her name just now, like picking something up off a counter and setting it back down again. She pressed her back against the wall and breathed very quietly and waited for some part of her to catch fire with anger, because anger would have been easier. Anger would have been something to hold. What she felt instead was something much colder and much more specific. The sensation of watching a door close that you hadn't known was a door. She had the blue envelope in her hand. Inside it, a single sonogram printed on paper, her name at the top, the date, the gestational age, and the small impossible shape of something that was already hers. She turned around. She walked back down the corridor, past the bar, past the main dining room, out through the front entrance into the November cold of North Wells Street. She stood on the sidewalk, and the city moved around her the way it always did, indifferent, constant, requiring nothing. She tucked the envelope into the inside pocket of her coat, against her chest, and she got in a cab and went home, and she did not cry, which surprised her. She sat on the edge of her bathtub for a long time instead. The next morning, she called her Aunt Dee. Dee Nash lived in Burlington, Vermont, in a house that smelled like wood smoke and old paperbacks, and had a back porch that looked out over the lake, and she had the specific personality of a woman who had spent 40 years teaching middle school English and had, as a result, developed an extraordinary tolerance for chaos and an equally extraordinary instinct for what mattered. When Elodie arrived at the Burlington bus station at 11 in the morning with a rolling bag and a face that told a complete story, Dee looked at her for 2 seconds and said, "There's soup on the stove." She poured coffee. She sat down at the kitchen table. She waited. "I'm pregnant," Elodie said finally, "and I don't think I'm going to tell him." Dee was quiet for a moment. "Did something happen?" "Yes." "Do you want to say what?" "No," and then because Dee was Dee, maybe later. "Okay." Dee picked up her coffee. Outside, Burlington was doing its November thing, gray and clean and slow in the way of a place that doesn't hurry for anyone. "You staying?" "For a while. I'll move the boxes out of the second bedroom." She stayed. A week became 2, became a month, became the rest of the winter. She took a temporary position at the local pediatric clinic 3 days a week. She took walks along the waterfront in the mornings when the air was cold enough to make her breath visible and the lake was flat and gray, and she could think without any of her Chicago life pressing in. She did not check her messages for the first 5 days. When she finally did, there were 11 from Paxton, the first few carefully worded, the kind that carry apology in their rhythm without stating it, and then fewer, and then one more, and then nothing. The nothing was what she'd been waiting for, and it hurt more than she expected. But the baby was growing. She felt that first unmistakable flutter on a Wednesday morning in December, something pressing back, saying, "Here." And she stood in Dee's kitchen with her hand flat on her stomach and just breathed. The blue envelope was in the drawer of the nightstand in the second bedroom. She hadn't thrown it away. Paxton found out where she was the way she'd known. Eventually, he would, through Briggs, his assistant, who had the particular gift of locating things through the patient accumulation of quiet information. She didn't know when he learned. She only knew that on a Thursday afternoon in mid-January, her phone showed a number she didn't recognize, and then it showed his. She answered because she was done with avoidance. Avoidance was expensive. "You're in Vermont," not a question. "Yes." "I know what you heard." His voice was different. She'd learned every register of Paxton Sinclair's voice in 8 months, and this one she hadn't heard before. Stripped down. "Briggs found the Carver House reservation record. I know you were there that night." She didn't answer. "Elodie, don't say my name like that." "Like what?" "Like you're trying to pull me back into the conversation." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm here. I'm listening. Say what you need to say." "I need to see you," he said. "Not on the phone, please." She thought about the service hallway. She thought about "she'll be fine" and the specific casualness of it. She thought about how she'd walked out of that building without making a sound, which had cost her more than she'd admitted to anyone. "Come then," she said. He came 2 days later. He found her on the walking path along the lake. Dee had told him where to look, without being asked, something Elodie filed away for later examination. He was wearing the wrong coat for the weather, which told her he'd come directly without thinking about packing correctly, which told her something else. She kept walking when she heard him behind her. He fell into step beside her, leaving space, and they walked without speaking for a full minute. "I'm not going to apologize my way through this," he said finally, "because you've already decided whether apologies are worth anything coming from me right now." Smart. "I want to tell you what was actually true that night and what wasn't. All right?" He told her, not the managed version. She could tell the difference by now. He told her that Alden had been pressing him for months about her, about whether she was a liability, and that night he'd said what would end that conversation quickly so he could get back to counting down the minutes until he could leave. He told her it had been cowardice. He told her he'd known it the moment the words were out of his mouth. "You didn't correct him," she said. "You said I'd be fine." "I know. That's not a mischaracterization. That's what you said. It was what I said, so I didn't have to have a harder conversation in front of people who would have used it. That distinction matters to you." Yes. "It doesn't entirely fix it." "No," he said, "it doesn't." They reached a bench at the edge of the path, facing the lake. She sat. He sat at the far end, leaving the kind of careful distance that said, "I understand where I am in this." The lake was flat and cold. Somewhere to the left, a bird moved across the water and was gone. She looked at the water and made a decision about what she was going to say next. "I was coming to tell you something that night," she said. He went very still. "I'd been carrying it for 11 days. She didn't look at him. "I was going to show you, actually. I brought something." He was quiet for a long moment. "A girl," she said, "probably." He turned to look at her. She felt it more than she saw it. "I have a doctor here. I have Dee. I don't need anything from you to manage this." "That's not." "I know what you're going to say." She finally looked at him. "And I need you to understand that managing things is not the shape of what would actually matter." He held her gaze without performing anything in his face, just held it. "What shape is it?" he asked. She looked back at the lake. "I don't know yet," she said. "Find a hotel. If I want to talk more, I'll come find you." He found a hotel on Cherry Street and stayed. She didn't come find him, but she didn't tell him to leave, which was its own kind of language that she knew he understood. He extended his stay by a week, then another. He stayed because proximity was the only honest thing he had to offer. She understood this without being told. What she didn't know was that 700 miles south, his family was having a very different conversation about her. Carlton Sinclair called Briggs on a Thursday morning and asked for an address in Burlington, Vermont. Briggs called Paxton first. Paxton called his father. The conversation was short. "Whatever you're considering, don't." His father's response was measured. "There are implications that extend beyond." And Paxton said, "Her name is Elodie. Use it," which ended the call before anything was resolved. What Paxton didn't know was that it didn't end the action. Carlton's emissary arrived at Dee Nash's house on a Tuesday afternoon while Elodie was at the clinic. Dee answered the door. A well-dressed man with a leather portfolio and the practiced warmth of someone who delivered unwelcome things for a living said the Sinclair family wanted to ensure comfort and stability, that the amount enclosed reflected their genuine care, that they hoped for a quiet and private resolution. Dee held up one hand. "I'm going to stop you there," she said. She closed the door. Elodie drove home in 12 minutes. She sat at the kitchen table, and Dee told her everything, and Elodie listened with her hands flat on the surface, and her jaw locked, and a very controlled fury working its way through her like cold water finding channels. Then she called Paxton. "Did you know?" she said when he picked up. About the emissary, no. About my father's intent to. A pause. I knew it was possible. I tried to stop it. Your family sent a man to my aunt's house. Her voice was the temperature of flat water, with an envelope and a polite message about a quiet resolution. They came here, Paxton, to Dee's house, while I was at work. I know. Knowing it and doing something about it are two different things, and I need to know right now which one you're actually capable of. A silence, 4 seconds, she counted. I'm already in the car, he said. He came. He walked through Dee's front door, left unlocked, found Elodie at the kitchen table, and sat across from her, and called his father from that table, in that kitchen, while she watched. He didn't manage it. He didn't use the layered, careful architecture of how men in his position usually navigated these conversations. He said, an emissary went to Burlington today, to her aunt's house. That stops now. His father said something. Paxton said, I don't care what the optics are. She is not a situation to be resolved. She's the mother of my child, and if anyone from this family contacts her again in any form, they will deal with me directly. He ended the call. He set the phone on the table. Elodie looked at him across the kitchen. Okay, she said, not forgiveness. Something smaller and more honest, the first degree of a door opening. He nodded. He didn't push it further. He moved into a sublet on Pine Street, 5 minutes from the house. He went running along the lake in the mornings. He worked remotely. He asked, not assumed, whether she needed anything. Half the time she said no, the other half she said maybe one thing, and he got the one thing without making it a moment. 3 weeks into this arrangement, Paxton's younger brother Whitmore Sinclair, who had been present at every significant family conversation for 15 years and had perfected the art of being useful and invisible in equal measure, made a phone call to a journalist at a Chicago Society column. The piece ran on a Tuesday morning. Elodie's name, her clinic, the pregnancy, Burlington, and a quote attributed to a Sinclair family source suggesting she had pursued the relationship with financial motives and that the timing of the pregnancy was, in the source's phrasing, convenient. She read it at 7 in the morning with coffee she didn't finish. Her hands were very still. She put the phone face down and sat with it for 1 complete minute, the way she sat with things she needed to fully process before she reacted. Then she picked it back up and called Paxton. Which one of them? She said. I'm finding out. They called me calculating. Her voice was flat in a way that had nothing to do with calm. They put my name in a newspaper and said I planned this. My clinic. People I trained with are going to read this. I know. Knowing it and... Elodie. His voice was different, something past anger. Give me 2 hours. It was Whit. Paxton had the name within 90 minutes, through Briggs, who had already been looking. He drove to Chicago the same day, not to Whit's apartment, to the Sinclair family dinner that happened, without exception, every Tuesday night at the family house in Kenilworth, which Paxton walked into unannounced at 7:15 p.m. while the bread was still being passed. He stood at the head of the table. His mother stopped mid-sentence. His father set down his fork. And Paxton looked at his brother directly and said, in a voice that was not loud and was for that reason more devastating than loud, You called a journalist about Elodie. You gave them a fabricated quote about her character, and you did it under our family's name. I want you to say out loud why. Whit started to speak. Paxton held up a hand. Not the version where you were protecting the family, the actual version. The table was very quiet. I didn't want you to throw everything away for someone who... Someone who what? Whit was silent. She's a pediatric nurse practitioner, Paxton said. She runs a clinic for underinsured families 2 days a week out of her own pocket. She has never asked me for a single thing, and you told a journalist she was doing this on purpose. He looked at his brother without performance. You told them that the person I love was calculating. The word landed where he intended it. He hadn't planned to use it in this room, but it was the right word, and he was done choosing wrong ones. His father said, Paxton, sit down. I'll stand. He looked at Whit one more time. You'll call that journalist tonight. A retraction in your name. Not a family statement. Your name. I won't. Yes, Paxton said very quietly, you will. Carlton looked at his son with an expression that was not anger. Anger would have been easier to navigate. It was something older, the expression of a man watching a chapter close in a story he thought he was still writing. Whit made the call. The retraction ran the following morning. Paxton drove back to Burlington that night and called Elodie from the highway. It's done, he said. Retraction goes up in the morning. Whit's name. A breath on her end. How did you do it? I went to the dinner. In front of everyone? Yes. She was quiet. Come to the house tomorrow, she said. I'll leave the light on. He came. He told her about the table, about standing at the head of it, about what he'd said and how the room had gone quiet, and she listened without asking him to make it smaller. She said good once, quietly, to something he said about holding his ground with Carlton, and he understood that from Elodie that was not a small word. In the weeks after, he told her he was restructuring his partnership stake, separating his personal assets from the family investment vehicle, making it legally clear that his decisions about his personal life were not subject to family oversight or financial leverage. She looked at him across the table. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do, he held her gaze. Not because you asked, because it's the only honest way to show you I've decided something. He did it. It took 3 weeks and a formal meeting and a conversation with his father that ended with Carlton saying, very quietly, she must matter, and Paxton saying, she does. Ada was born on a Friday morning at Burlington Medical Center, 6 days before her due date, in the unhurried way that made her pediatric nurse practitioner mother mutter classic at the ceiling. She arrived at 7:42 a.m., 6 pounds 4 ounces, with a grip that the delivering nurse called, with professional understatement, impressive. They put her on Elodie's chest. Elodie made a sound that was not a word, something that came from underneath language, the pure and unmanaged expression of a person whose entire body has just understood something enormous at once. Paxton stood at the edge of the room. He had been there since 3 a.m. when Elodie had called him voice level, saying, it's time. He had driven over in 8 minutes. He had not been in the way. He had been present in exactly the manner the moment required, not performing concern, just exercising it, and she had let him stay because staying was the right call, and she was past the point of making calls based on anything other than what was simply true. The nurse looked at him. Do you want to? Elodie looked at him too. He was looking at Ada, not at anyone else. She nodded. He cut the cord. He held his daughter for the first time and stood very still, which was how Elodie knew he was feeling everything at once, because Paxton in motion was Paxton managing, and Paxton still was Paxton completely undone. He looked up. His face was open in a way she hadn't seen in 8 months together, and hadn't seen in all the months since. She has your hands, he said. The way she's holding, she has your hands. Elodie looked at her daughter's small fist curled against the air. I know, she said. The word carried more than its 3 letters. He heard all of it. They named her Ada. Elodie had decided it on the second day, in the clear-headed way of someone who has just come through something enormous and knows precisely what matters now. Just Ada. Nothing it was short for. She'd looked at her daughter's face, and the name was simply there, the way true things sometimes are. Not chosen, just recognized. The months after Ada's birth had a rhythm Elodie hadn't anticipated. Not ease, not resolution, just the specific forward motion of ordinary days, building something new over the ruin of what hadn't worked. Paxton stayed in the Pine Street sublet, close enough for the 6 a.m. and the 2 a.m. and the clinic runs and the pediatric appointments, far enough that Elodie's home was still her own. She had set this distance herself, and he had accepted it the way he'd accepted everything in the past months. Not performing patience, just exercising it, which was a different thing entirely. He learned which chamomile settled her stomach when she was tired. He learned Ada's sleep cycles. He learned not to say everything's going to be fine during hard moments, because Elodie didn't need to be told that. She already knew. What she needed was someone to be in the room with her while the hard thing was still hard. He learned to do that. In September, Whit came to Burlington. He drove up on a Saturday, which Elodie had agreed to after 2 voicemails and a handwritten letter she read 3 times. She made coffee. She sat across from him and let him say what he'd come to say, which was not polished and was not managed and which cost him something visible. She said, "The article is gone, but I still got the texts from people I went to nursing school with who'd read it. You need to understand that that happened and isn't fixed by a retraction." Whit said he understood. "Good," she said. "We'll see." He asked to see Ada. She brought Ada in. Whit sat on the floor, which Elodie hadn't expected, and Ada looked at him with the focused indifference of a 5-month-old who has not yet decided you are interesting. Elodie watched this and thought, not forgiveness, but the beginning of something that could get there, given enough time and enough earned inches. October came, 1 year since the blue envelope. She got it out of the nightstand drawer on a Sunday morning, just held it. The gold clasp had left a small crease in the paper from a year in the dark. She ran her thumb over the crease and thought about the woman she'd been in the stationery aisle on North Wells Street, standing there for 47 minutes trying to find exactly the right blue. That woman had not been wrong. That was what she'd come to understand over 12 months. The hope hadn't been a mistake. The choice to believe something was real hadn't been naive. What happened in the hallway at Carver House had been real too, and both things could be true without one erasing the other. She heard Paxton's car in the driveway. She heard Ada's particular sound of recognition, the one she made when she heard his footsteps, not yet language, but clearly you, the one who stays. And Elodie put the envelope on the kitchen counter, not in a drawer, on the counter where the morning light came through. He came in. He looked at the envelope. He looked at her. "That's—" "Yes," she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it, for the hallway, for what I said, for what it cost you to walk out of there without making a sound when you were carrying." He stopped. "For the 11 days before that you carried it alone." She'd heard apologies from him before. This one was different. She could tell the difference now. "Ask me," she said. He stilled. "You told me once that you loved me." She was careful with the words. "You said don't say anything back. You said you just needed me to have heard it." A pause. "Ask me now." He set Ada down in the bouncy seat, very carefully, and he looked at Elodie across the kitchen. "Do you love me?" he asked. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Burlington was doing its October thing, the leaves going, the air sharpening, the light going gold, the way it did for about 3 weeks each year before winter arrived and changed everything. "Yes," she said. Not a fairy tale, not a resolution. Just a true thing said plainly, with all the weight of 12 months behind it and everything still ahead. He breathed once, fully, the way you breathe when you've been holding something for a very long time. "Okay," he said. She almost smiled. He caught it. Ada made a sound from the bouncy seat. Both of them looked at her. She was entirely unimpressed with the moment, which was, Elodie thought, exactly right. She picked up the blue envelope from the counter, turned it over once. Then she set it on the windowsill where the morning light could reach it, the robin's egg blue of it, the small gold clasp, the crease from the drawer where it had spent a year waiting. Not hidden, not thrown away. Just placed where it could finally be seen. Paxton looked at it there in the light. He understood what she was telling him without being told. He put the coffee on. He made 2 cups.